Hello. So how are the levels good today? You doing alright with the music and the microphone? Cool. Alright, so I have to... Hello. Okay, so let's see. This week we're going to do a little bit of some review for some stuff we did before. So last week we talked about post-processing and how to integrate that into your projects, and everyone made sure that they picked out their final project concepts. And so after this, we're going to have this short review and just maybe some new material for UI stuff, and then we will go into Blackboard Library Ultra and discuss, we'll share the final project stuff. Hello, Amortium. I can never remember people's names from their username. Music's a little loud. I will turn it down. Let's see. Is that better? Hey, Angelo. Alright, so, and I'm sorry I'm looking over there. It's like I have the chat over here. So, let's see, today we're going to talk about UI stuff. I'm going to show you a demonstration of some UI stuff that I've done. And in the demonstration, I'm going to show you Blood Broker, which I'm not sure if I've referenced it in this class, but I've referenced it in other classes. And so, just a little warning, it's, as the title suggests, there's like blood in it. So if you're sensitive to the sight of blood, I mean, it's cartoonish-ish. It's not coming from people or anything, so just a little bit of warning on that. So I'm going to go ahead and pull that up. So just a second. And I will say something when I'm done showing it, so if someone's looking away, they'll be able to come back. Ah, this is muted. Okay, you can hear me now, right? Can you hear me now? Tell me you can hear me now. Okay, thank God. Cool. Okay. Sorry, I forgot how I had this set up before because I switched scenes in OBS and I had it muted from whatever I was doing before. Okay, so let me think back to like what I said, which is gonna be kind of hard because I don't remember what was the last thing I said that you heard? Because I don't remember when I switched scenes. Something about something. Okay, okay, very specific. All right, so and I'm gonna put Ariel outside because she's gonna drive me crazy otherwise. So say goodbye, Ariel. Okay, so all right, so I was talking about Blood Broker is a game that I've been working on for a while. It's sort of been on hiatus. And so this, I did mention it before, this was actually a game that is, and also you can hear my desktop audio as well, right? So this game is actually from the Weird Game Ideas Twitter bot. So the prompt was actually one of the ones that came up in GD205 2 years ago. And so I really like that prompt, and so I actually made it into a game myself. So you're not the only one making a game based on the Weird Game Ideas Twitter bot. So, and please jump in as soon as you cannot hear me, because if it happens again, you know, well, we don't want it to happen again, right? Okay, so I'm just walking this through. So the game opened up, right, and I already have some UI options. So here it's asking if you want to have the instructions for how to play. So there's a yes and a no. These are two different UI buttons in Unity. So I'm going to hit yes. And so here now we have a pop-up. We have, this is a text field, and there's also a panel behind it. That panel is the piece that's making it a little bit dark. And then I have a button over here, this little arrow, which will actually like advance or go back for the different options. So it's giving you the different text fields for instructions. And so as I click through the buttons, it's also playing audio clips. So the audio clip, you can I don't know if you can hear it, but it's like a little like soft UI sound. It's like a little bit of like a percussion sound. And so I'm clicking through these things, and it's changing the text to be update for each one. And so does anyone see any UI elements here right now? Because I'm just waiting to click. When I click, the game starts. So do you see anything that might be a user interface element as of right now? Counting on this one being interactive. So the tower, I mean, so you could say that it's, I mean, you're gonna interface with it, as in it's like, well, like, so I'm hovering over it, for instance, and you can see that the lighting is changing when I hover over it. So Animatic Dude just said that the corner, so the top corner, you see these are actually numbers. So one represents a time and one represents the number of people sacrificed. So, and I can actually right click here. It gives me additional instructions. I'm just gonna get through all this stuff. You can see that each of these people in this queue has a number beside them. Those are actually not UI elements. Those are what's called 3D text, which is text. And I think we may have done this in class. 3D text is, right, Jay? 3D text is actually in the space of the game. So this one's not UI text. UI text usually takes place like as a layer on top of the camera. So everything shows up and then a separate layer. And so I'm just gonna go ahead and start playing so you can see this stuff changing. You can see as I click the tower, people are being sacrificed and it's changing the number up here. There's also, the second thing is actually a timer. You may notice that, and I already forgot, I put some debug commands in here to pause it. but I don't remember what it is. So like you see how these are extra options that pop up. These are actually technically not Unity UI elements, but they are effectively for players to interact with. And so you can actually do that with, there's like a separate camera, so that is something else that's occupying like a different space than this main camera. You can also see that, see this like weird wavy stuff behind here? Like it's like a meter, and you can see it's going down. That's a separate UI element. When you lose the game, you have text that pops up, you have a bunch of other stuff. And then if I press escape right here, a menu pops up. We have a number of different UI buttons. We have UI text fields and UI panels. So just to go through some of the stuff, if I go into the options, you can see several different things in here. So you see, this is called a slider. So I can slide it left or right to affect the value. There's a second slider here. So the first one's difficulty level. The second one is claw sensitivity, which don't worry about it. The third thing, does anyone know what this is called, where you can check it on or off? Anyone know what that's called? There are two of them. One is for whether you want the audio playing, and one is whether the camera should stay still. You could call it a checkbox. In this case, we call it a toggle, but it is effectively a checkbox. So in Unity, if you're looking for it, it'll be called toggle. So we have a drop-down window here, and so we have several different options. So last week, I talked about how in this game, which has a lot of the main colors are red and green, which affects people who have red-green color blindness. And so I added a red-green colorblind option in here. You can actually, in this drop-down, you can select something and it will change the settings. So what it will do is it will actually change the profile for the post-processing effects. So remember, last time we just created one profile, but you can actually have multiple profiles that equate to different effects. And so you can change these, so I can change it between these different ones. You can also, there's a button here, which is for the music, so you can go to the next track. So what it does is it actually changes out the audio track in the audio source. So it changes out the audio clip within the audio source. So we did audio source stuff before. Remember, audio sources play audio clips. So just like a few more things. So I also have a credits button here, which has a lot of text things. It has an image. You can display images in here, so that actually shows the Weird Game Ideas Twitter bot. A screenshot of that particular one from April 4th, 2017. That was actually 3 years ago. You can also see that like one of my students also made a game based on this prompt, so there's a link in there. And feel free to ask any questions, if you have any questions while I'm going through this. And so I'm just actually gonna quit the game. So if I go to quit, and when I'm clicking through these menus, what it's doing is, if you remember, like when we have UI elements are subsets of a canvas, right? So every group of UI things is part of a canvas. So like when I exit out of the game, it's basically enabling or disabling the canvas, so the entire thing. So I have one canvas, which is based on this pause menu. I have a separate canvas during the game that is showing the elements like the number of humans sacrificed and the timer. So those things are a separate canvas. So when I press escape, it disables the canvas for the gameplay and enables the canvas for the pause menu. Does that make sense? I hope it makes sense. And so when I go to quit, there are actually two different options here. One is to quit with tip, so that if you click that, it'll actually close out the application and it'll open your web browser to a donation site. Or you can just click quit without tip, which I don't think I want to tip myself right now, although I'm doing a great job, except for the audio thing. And it will just quit the game. So like one of the biggest things that's missing from student games is the ability to quit the game. It's like the #1 thing missing, because it's not something you really think about, and usually if you're talking about a desktop application, there are usually secondary ways to close the game. But when you're doing a release, you always want to make sure you have the ability to quit the game, because if you don't, a lot of people that are less computer savvy will not know how to close it. So they might not know how to open up the task manager. They might not know like Alt F4 or Command Q or whatever, depending on the operating system you're using. So I was just showing you some different applications for the UI elements. So here we have our scene that we did the UI, or sorry, not the UI, the post-processing demo last week. So we still have the post-processing effects up. And so if we just remind you what it looks like. So we have last week we introduced this we created this post-processing profile. We added the post-processing volume and the post-processing layer to our main camera. And then we also set the, let's just go to it really quick so we can talk about it. So we added, so first of all, we went to Window Package Manager. So it pulled up the package manager stuff, and then we went to post-processing, which is right here, and made sure that we installed the right version of post-processing, or whichever one is verified for our version of Unity. So once it was installed and we went to our main camera in our scene, we went to add component. So we added two components. The first component was post-process layer. And so for layer, and it says not to do this, but just for our purposes, it's fine. We set the layer to everything or default, which means that it will actually share the post-processing effects across the board. So it'll affect everything in your scene, everything your camera sees. We turned on the anti-aliasing, which will blur the jaggies. We added the post-process volume. We hit is global. We created a new profile here. And then we started to add effects. So this stuff was not in here by default. We had to actually click add effect, and then we could choose from like a number of different options for things that are built in. And so we added stuff like ambient occlusion, which like adds dark areas, areas where there should be shadows. We added bloom, which sort of blurs the bright areas. We added depth of field, which allows it to have like a camera-like focus on a certain area. So like things that get closer to that focal point are sharper, things that get further away are blurrier. We added this grain, which is like film grain, chromatic aberration, which gives you distortion mostly around the edges between different color channels, and color grading, which just allows us to affect the color balance in a lot of different ways, as well as like the exposure and things like that. So that's what we did last week. So I was just going back through that a little bit because I forgot to record it. So please, again, let me know if you have any questions in the chat. Just feel free to stop me at any moment. All right, so now this week we're going to add some UI stuff. For this, I mean, it doesn't really matter which scene we're talking about because it's just for demonstration. So you remember the first thing we want to do if we want to create something in the UI or using the UI system? Create a canvas, right? So we can, under our hierarchy, we can go to create, UI, create canvas. Also, if we do not have a canvas and we go to create something else, it will also create something. But I'm just going to go ahead and create a canvas here. So a canvas is a UI layer, basically something that can be seen by the player. So we have some default options over here on the right in our inspector. So if we go down under, and actually I'm not going to mess with this yet. I'm going to first create a button. So if I right click on my canvas, go to UI, and then hit button, it will create a button as a child of the canvas. And now we can see this button here. So I can also, if I double click on it, it will give it focus. And if we see in here, notice how when I double clicked on it, it actually took me to a different frame. So we have this frame here that represents the UI element. So it's it looks like it's in my scene, but it's not. Actually, it's just a way of displaying it. So I can like move it around so I can see what that looks like on the screen using my game view. So like, let's say it was right here. And so going back to our canvas, one thing that we want to think about is right now the scale mode is set to constant pixel size. So what that means is that the elements of the canvas, such as the button, so let's say it's like, I don't know, 300 pixels wide, it's not going to matter what the resolution is of the screen, the size of the screen, anything. It's always going to be 300 pixels wide. So do you think that's good or bad for a user interface if it's a fixed size pixel-wise? So John thinks it's bad. Why do you think it's bad, John? And I'm sorry, I'm asking you to type a lot. Oh, and I forgot to start the music again. Yeah, no wonder it's like... No wonder I'm not feeling calm. Okay, so John said, because if the resolution on the screen is bigger than the elements, will look small, among other things. So that's right. So like, for instance, imagine that your screen resolution is, maybe your screen is 1280 by 720, which is 720p. Then that 300 pixels wide for the button is going to take up a lot of real estate on the screen. So it'll take up like a fourth of the screen's width, versus if we had a 4K monitor, which is, I don't even know what the resolution is, like 38. Well, just imagine that it's like a much bigger resolution. That 300 pixel wide button is going to take up a much smaller portion of the screen. And so another thing that we can see is that if I just like make this bigger or smaller, so as I make this bigger or smaller, notice how the placement of the button, it goes all the way off screen. So it not only affects the size, but also affects the positioning of it. And so it goes off screen, we can't see it anymore. And so you have no predictability as far as what the player is going to see. So it's important here. I usually, unless you have a specific reason why not, I use scale with screen size. So it will actually scale depending on the screen. So we can actually set, for the reference resolution, I usually set this to be 1920 by 1080 because that's the most common resolution these days. So I'm just typing that in. And I leave the rest of the stuff the same. So now we can see the button is here. And if I scale that game view, notice how it's staying in the same position regardless. The scale is not changing and the position is not changing. So regardless of what the resolution of the player's running, 16 by 9 will still yield the same result for them. Hope that makes sense. So now we have our button here. And if we click on the button, notice it has a child. So the child is text. So the text is the actual text on the button. So in this case, it just says button. So it has a text component to it. So what I'm going to call this one is load scene, or I'm just going to say load first scene. So what that means is this button will be used eventually to load the first scene in our build options. So right now it won't do anything. So if I hit play, I can click on the button, but it doesn't do anything, right? There's nothing associated with it. So it has an effect. It does where it darkens when I click down, and it goes back to the light color when I release it. And so what we have to do when we want it to actually do something for the button is if you actually click on the button in the hierarchy, and then you scroll down, you'll see a whole bunch of options for the button component. So this button component gives you options for like the colors that appear. So for instance, like what color does it appear like when you click it or when you hover over it, or when it's disabled, how quickly does that color change for like the fade duration, things like that. And so you have control over that. And then the most important thing is toward the bottom where it says on click. So what that means is that you want something to happen when the click happens. So when it says empty, it means nothing is going to happen when I actually click the button. So if I hit the plus, it gives me the option to assign an object. So I could assign a game object in my scene, or I could assign an asset or something. And then in the right over here, it says no function. So, which means that a function is going to go in there. So one thing that I could do is I could do something like, and I'm going to actually duplicate this button so that we have a second button, because I'm going to get back to the load first scene. So if I select that button and I hit Control D or Command D on a Mac, it will duplicate it, and then I'm just going to move it over here. So we have it over here. If I expand this out and go to text, I'm going to call this one Disable Sun. So if it's disabling something, what is the closest thing to the sun in our scene? So every scene starts off with one. So John asked, do you normally use the standard UI elements or Text Mesh Pro for your projects? For simple stuff, I just use the default things, and if I want to control, so like in Blood Broker, for instance, when I had the instructions, I don't know if you remember that some of the instructions were in a different font. So like it would say like blood mode, for instance, and that would be in the color red, and it would be a different font than the rest of the text. And so to get that functionality, I use Text Mesh Pro. But for simple things that are just plain text, and there is some support for basic markdown, I think, within the text field. So if you want to make something bold or italicized, there's like a little bit of support for that. So if I'm doing something advanced, I will usually use Text Mesh Pro, but it's not necessary for most things. Does that answer your question? Okay, cool. So if I go back to this second button, and I'll just call this one Sun button, and I go under the button component, so I have here the ability to choose an object, and so by default I have the option of assets. So this is all of my assets in my project folder, and then scene. So I'm going to select scene because I want to influence a specific game object. And so if I look through this list, the directional light is the closest thing to the sun, and so I selected that one, and now this the box that was grayed out where it says no function is now available. So if I click this down, you'll see 3 different options here. One is game object, so you can actually have functions that are built into the game object class that's built into Unity. You have things transform, and then light is the actual light component. So you can actually see a list of like whatever's available, anything you could influence there, including a component that's attached to it. So if I go under game object, there's set active bool. So set active is game object.setActive, and then in parentheses it takes an argument of true or false. So true will make it active in your scene, and false will make it inactive in your scene. So if I select that, and it gives me a little checkbox now. So if that checkbox is checked, that means that when I click this button, find that game object, directional light, and then make it active. If I uncheck it, if it's an empty checkbox or toggle, then that means that it's going to find that game object and it's going to make it inactive. So it's going to set active false. So let's go ahead and try it. I'm going to hit play, and then I'm going to click disable sun, and when I do, you can see in our hierarchy over here that this is now made inactive. So can anyone imagine like a shortcoming of using a button for this? Because now when I click disable sun, like what if I want to get it back? So like if I click it now, it doesn't do anything because the sun is already inactive. So thinking back to like what we used, or what I went through in Blood Broker, can anyone think of like potentially a different UI element that might be a better choice for this? So, and if we look under I can right click on canvas and go in UI. So we have things like text, image, button, toggle, slider, scroll bar, drop down, input field, canvas, panel, scroll view, event system. So do you think any of those might be a better so John thinks toggle. I agree. So I think that what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a toggle. So now I have another thing here, and if I hover in the scene view and I press F, it will focus that object. And so I can see it's like, you can see it's kind of a little bit higher than this. And I can also just make this bigger. And so, and this is not going to be laid out well, it's just for demonstration. So if I go scroll down within my toggle game object, and you can see it has like another section that's like the on click for the button, and it says on value changed. So if I hit the plus, I can once again select in the scene, I can select the directional light. And then if I go drop down, I go to game object, I go to set active. And so now notice it does not give me a checkbox, because the way that the toggle works is it will set it active if it's checked, and it will set active false, making it inactive if it's unchecked. So now if I try this instead of the button, I can use that to both turn it off and turn it on. So it adds that dual functionality that's useful. And you can also see that in the toggle component, it has an is on. So for instance, if you wanted to start off with this, like if you want the game to start and you want this toggle to be off, you could use that, that option there. I hope that makes sense. Let me know if it doesn't. Okay, so let's see. Trying to think of what else we can do without having to get into scripting yet. So another thing we can do is I'm going to right click on my canvas again. I'm going to UI, and I'm going to go to slider. So this will create a slider, and you can see it's right here. Get a little bit bigger. And so if we look at, and again, for these, they also have, like the toggle has children. So it has things like background, check mark. So like all of the graphics associated with the UI elements are in there as well. So you could change those to look different if you wanted to. So by default, like the kind of like the checkbox and some of that, if you look in the bottom right hand corner, which you can't see very well, if you look at it here, can you see that? Don't look at my email, I don't know what's in there. You can see it's really blurry because it's based on a very low resolution image, so you could switch that out for something else. So like in this option, it has the source image here, so I could switch that out. You could also change the material, all kinds of options in here. You could change the label, so I could change this to sun on/off toggle. So all of those things are accessible. So going back to our slider, so we have the slider here, and so if I scroll down in here, we have the slider component, which again functions the same way as the toggle and the button, and it has the on value changed. So I can hit the plus here, and then I can select an object. So I'm going to go back to my scene, and I'm going to go with the directional light again, because that's just what we're demonstrating right now. And so if I go to the function options, and I go, instead of going to game object, because I don't want to disable it or enable it or use the other things, because I could also, for instance, set a tag or change the name, or I could do things like that in there as well. But instead I'm going to go under the light component, which affects the light emitting aspect of a game object. So you actually have access to a whole bunch of different things. So if you go to dynamic, these are things that you have more influence over. So we can go to things like intensity, for instance. And you actually, like, because this is referencing things in the script, you actually have also some options that are not available in the inspector normally. So in this case, I'm just going to go to intensity. And another thing is that looking above that in the slider options, we have min value and max value, and value, which is like the initial value. And so set this to 1. So you can actually make the low end of the slider, right now it's set to be 0. So 0 is the very furthest you can go to the left, and the max value is the furthest you can go to the right. So it will actually influence the value light.intensity, which is the light component. So if I go back and look at my directional light, you can actually see that the intensity is right here. So this will actually, right now it's at 1, which is considered full brightness. You can go over it, but like it's considered full brightness. And so it will actually change this value. So if I hit play, and then I move this slider, you can see that not only does my scene lighting change, getting brighter or darker, you can see exactly how that slider is affecting this component. So switch it back up to 1, and we could even go back to our slider options, and let's say we didn't want to cap it at 1, we wanted to cap it at like, I don't know, 99 or something. So now if I go and I can make it like crazy bright, right? Like too bright. No one wants it that bright. But I have the option, I can do it. So you can see how that can be used to modify that. You could see how the minimum value could, I mean, it can't be less than 0. But the maximum can go very high. So I will set this back to 1. So we have like a reasonable influence over the lighting situation using these UI elements. So does that make sense so far? Everything clear as far as like we looked at buttons, we looked at toggles and sliders so far. Cool. All right, so now let's try to think about like we actually want to use these. So I made this first button, which was load first scene, which right now it doesn't do anything, remember? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my scripts in my product view. I'm going to create a new script. So I'm going to right click in here, go to create C# script. So I'll call this one I'm just going to call it button stuff. That's just what I'm calling it right now. And I'm going to go ahead and open it up and move it over here. So what we're doing, so like you can affect parameters or values. So that's what we did with intensity. And you can also run functions. So what we can do is if we want to run a function, we can actually create custom functions. So I actually don't need the start or update in this case, in this example. So I can just delete it. It's not necessary, it's just optional. So it's just really simple and clean. And then when we're using anything UI related in our script, we have to make sure that we add the using directive for UI. So we already have system.collections, system.collections.generic, which are just like C# basic stuff. Unity engine, which is like a very broad thing that encompasses almost everything. And for some reason they make you, I guess because these systems are added later, add things like Unity engine and I can't type .ui. So that will give you access to the methods and things from UI. And another thing that we're going to add here to use is scene management. So scene management allows you to load scenes or change the scene. So I can add another one, which is using Unity engine .scene management. And so hopefully that's good to go. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create some custom functions that our buttons can run. So the first custom function I'm going to make is one that will be able to load a scene. So if I want to create a function, it's going to be a void function, meaning that it returns void. It just does something. It doesn't give back a number or anything like that. So I also want to make sure it's public so that it's accessible from other scripts. So I can make a public void function, and I'll call it load new scene. And one thing I can do is I can actually have a parameter in here that you pass in, so I can have an integer. So I'll call this one scene index. So when this function is called, it will need an integer in the parentheses to know what to load. So the command to actually make to load a scene is you have to access first the scene manager. And I can't even remember, did we do this together before? Did we do basic scene management stuff? Because my brain is just mashed potatoes now, so I don't really know what we did in the past. And all the semesters just blend together. So if I have the scene manager, okay, so some people have done it on their own. So scene manager.load scene will actually load a scene. There are several different ways you can load a scene. You can load a scene by the name of the scene. You can also load a scene by the index of the scene. So we're gonna load it by the index of the scene. So in this case, so it takes a parameter inside of load scene. So I called this load new scene, so it was clear that it was different than load scene, which is a built-in thing for the scene manager. Because load new scene is just an arbitrary name. It's just whatever the name we gave it for this script in particular. So for load scene, I can write scene index and then semicolon at the end. So whenever our button runs this function, it will need an integer for the index of the scene to load, and then it will actually pass that integer into here, so it will load scene based on whatever we specify. So we'll load the index of the scene that we specify. So I'm going to save this, Control S or Command S on a Mac, and I hope I have no errors. And then if I go to my button here, which maybe I should give it a better name, I'll call it load scene button. And then if I scroll down in here, so we have again the on click, so it's asking for an object, so I hit the circle with the dot, I go to a scene, the scene list, I go down to, actually I haven't actually attached this script yet, so I have to first, this is something you can easily forget, I forget all the time. So I'm gonna actually, what did I call it, button stuff? So I'm gonna drag that component onto my main camera because that's just often where I put them, just so I easily know where to find it. It doesn't really matter for this. So I'm gonna hit the circle with the dot to go to my scene, and I'm gonna select my main camera. And then under where it says no function, use the drop down, and you can actually see that my script is here, button stuff, and then if you look in here, you should see a list of things, and if you go to the middle, load new scene is in there. So that's the one that we actually created together. So like in the parentheses here, it tells you what kind of parameter it needs in order to run that function. And so like once I selected that function, it then has a box where it takes an integer. So if I do 0, that's the very first scene. So I have to go to File, Build Settings, to see what those, how everything is indexed. So right now I have scenes 1, 2, 3, and 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. All of those are in my build settings. And so like the very first week is the index 0 all the way on through. So now if I try this, I'm going to hit play. And if I hit load first scene, now it then loads the first scene. So I would have to, I could create other buttons if I wanted to load more scenes. But that's pretty much it for how you could use it to load a scene. I'm going to add another. I'm going to add a second function here. So it's going to be another public void function. So public void, and I'm going to call this one quit game. So as you can imagine, this is going to be for actually quitting the application. for the desktop application. So if you haven't used it, or in just like show of hands, how many of you have actually included a way to quit your game in your script? Any game you've made in the game design program or wherever. So John knows how to do it, but have you used it? Because it's one of those things where it doesn't really feel necessary until you're actually sending something out to the world for people to play it. And so that's why we don't usually like talk about it until like pretty late. Never build a game without it. Yes, I mean it's kind of bad if you don't have it, right? Because there's no way to quit the game like within the world of the game itself. So as John said, it's very simple to run that. So the application class has a quit method. So application.quit will actually quit the game. So if I want this if I want this function to run with a button, I have to link them the way we did the load scene one. So, and we actually don't really need the sun button, so I'm going to rename it to quit game. And then if I scroll down, instead of affecting the directional light, our script is attached to the main camera, so I'm going to select the main camera. And then under no function, you can go to button stuff and then quit game, and that will so like now and it won't work right now, so like if I hit play, I forgot to change the text on it, it won't work because we're not actually in the application itself, we're just in the editor. So you have to use your imagination a little bit to know if it's gonna work, but it's very simple, so it always works. So yeah, you'll have to build the game. And that can be helpful, yeah, if you have a debug.log to tell you that it's working. And so just for the record, I'm going to go ahead and edit the text associated with that button to quit game instead. And you also cannot quit, if you make a WebGL build of the game, it also will not quit the game because it's just running in the browser. So there's no way to, as far as I know, there's no way to quit the game in the browser. There's no way to close the browser tab. So yeah, I think that's everything that I was going to talk about today with the UI stuff, which is just sort of a review, but also like a little bit more detailed information. So you can also like organize these things. If you create like a panel, you can put everything into a panel, so you can have a hierarchy where a panel has a whole bunch of options on it, so you can like think of it as like a little window within your game. You can move that around if you want. Let me check my notes to see if there's anything else I was going to talk to you about. And if you have any questions, just let me know in the chat. So I think that's everything I wanted to talk about. Game, so it actually quits the game but doesn't close the browser window. So yeah, it's just not useful, and so if you're making a WebGL build, you don't have to worry about that quit functionality. So it's more for desktop builds. So any questions about the stuff we've done, or anything else, if anything else came to your mind? So it seems like there are no questions. So that's all the stuff we're going to talk about for UI stuff today. So for the rest of today, let's say at 6:30. Okay, cool. I'm glad it was helpful. So for 6:30, we will reconvene in the Blackboard Collaborate Ultra room, and then this will be available for if you want to view it later or something. So yeah, I hope you got something out of that. And I will see those of you that are in the class, I will see you very soon, okay? I will see you at 6:30 in the Blackboard Collaborate Ultra room. Bye.